Welcome. Today's deep dive is brought to you by Skip Benton with Coldwell Bankers Select Real Estate. If you are looking to buy a home in northern Nevada, then contact Skip.
Today we're going to dive into the U.S. housing market. Specifically, we're looking at vulnerability in the market. And we've got this insightful report from ATTOM. They've analyzed different areas in the U.S. and said which areas are most at risk of a downturn.
And really makes you think about where you live,
That's
right?
right.
Like, is your housing market, is it giving us those warning signs?
What's it? Flashing red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating, though, because AT Tom doesn't just say these markets are in trouble. They give us a way to understand this idea of vulnerability.
Okay.
So there's a method to it.
So what are we looking at? What are the factors? What are the things they're using to
Yeah, what are they using to measure this?
to measure this? Because they do call out California, New Jersey, and Illinois as having a high concentration of these at-risk markets.
And then there's this curveball. Parts of Florida are kind of joining that party as well.
Yeah, and when we look at the big picture, it's not entirely a surprise. These states have been dealing with affordability issues for a while.
Yeah.
But Florida's rapid rise on this vulnerability scale is definitely interesting. It's definitely something to pay attention to.
Okay. So let's get down to brass tacks here. What exactly are we talking about? What are the red flags? What makes a housing market vulnerable?
So AT-Tom breaks it down into four main categories. You've got affordability, underwater mortgages, foreclosures, and then you have unemployment.
Okay. Those make sense at a high level, but can we dig into each one of those?
Absolutely.
Starting with affordability, because that seems to be the theme, right?
Yeah, it's a recurring theme for sure. So affordability is all about the balance between home prices and wages. When home prices go way up and wages stay stagnant, you have a serious affordability problem.
Right.
The report actually points to specific counties where owning a home eats up a huge percentage of people's income.
Oh, wow.
And we're not talking like 30%, 40%. We're talking more than what people make in some cases.
That's a problem. Okay, what about these underwater mortgages? That term always makes me a little nervous.
It's a scary one for sure. Nobody wants to be underwater on their mortgage.
Right.
It basically means that you owe more on your mortgage than your house is actually worth.
Right.
And so high rates of these underwater mortgages are kind of like a warning sign.
Uh-huh.
It shows you that there might be some trouble brewing.
Yeah.
And it's especially worrisome now because interest rates are climbing.
Oh, right.
And that makes it harder for people to refinance and get out of that situation.
Yikes. Okay, foreclosures. What about foreclosures?
Yeah, those are never good.
Never a good sign.
No. And when you see a spike in foreclosures, it's a pretty clear indicator that a housing market is weakening.
Right.
And there's financial strain on the homeowners, it's like a domino effect. Things start to fall apart.
Yeah. Okay, and then lastly, we have unemployment. Now, I know that's not directly tied to housing, but it's definitely a factor, right?
For sure. High unemployment often leads to more financial hardship, right? People lose their jobs, they struggle to keep up with their mortgage payments, and then unfortunately that can trigger a wave of foreclosures. And so it puts a strain on that local economy as a whole.
Yeah, it's all interconnected. So the report highlights specific areas like the New York City and Chicago metro areas and parts of California. It seems like these markets are really feeling the pressure more than others.
Okay.
So what is it about those markets that make them so vulnerable?
Yeah, they have this high concentration of counties where all these factors that we just talked about are kind of converging. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a
Yeah.
perfect storm of, all these things happening at once.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets really interesting. And this is what really stood out to me in the report. They talk about Kings County, and that's Brooklyn. And in Kings County, get this, major ownership costs eat up a staggering 108% of the average wages.
Yeah.
108%. So you're actually
More than what people are making.
more than what people are making.
Yeah. Imagine having to work like an extra 4 hours every week just to cover those basic housing costs.
Yeah. That's tough. That's the reality for a lot of people in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
It's rough.
And it just really highlights, that's an extreme example, but it really highlights the affordability challenges in those markets.
It does. And then you contrast that with some of these least at-risk markets like we see in Tennessee and Wisconsin, where their home ownership costs seem much more in line with what people are earning, and the unemployment rates are lower.
Yeah, they're painting a very different picture of stability in the housing market.
Right. But even in those seemingly stable markets, it's important to remember that no market is entirely risk-free.
Right. There's always some level of risk.
Exactly. So why should we care about these vulnerabilities? How does this impact the average person,
Mm.
not just, policymakers and economists? Well, first of all, it's crucial for anyone who's thinking about buying a home
Yeah.
or selling a home.
Yeah.
Understanding those risks in your local market can help you make smarter decisions financially.
So we're not just talking about, macro trends. We're talking about things that impact individuals and families
Absolutely.
on a personal level.
And, it goes beyond that, too. Policymakers, they need this information to develop effective housing and economic policies.
Right.
They need to understand where those pressure points are to provide the right support,
Makes sense.
and resources. So it's really about understanding where the greatest needs are.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground, but before we move on, I'm curious. If Tennessee is this supposed, haven of stability,
Right.
why aren't we seeing this massive exodus of people moving there?
That's a good question.
Like, what's the catch? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, some people are moving there. But you're right. It's not a stampede. And there are a few reasons for that. First of all, job markets and economic opportunities. Those are going to vary across the country.
Right.
So Tennessee might have affordable housing,
Sure.
but if there aren't enough jobs in your field, it's not a simple solution.
Right. You can't just pick up and move based on housing.
Exactly. There are other factors to consider.
Right.
And then second, let's not forget about lifestyle preferences.
Right.
People choose where to live based on a whole range of factors. Climate, culture, proximity to family and friends.
Yeah.
Tennessee might not appeal to everyone.
Right.
And that's okay.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's really about finding that sweet spot,
Exactly. Yeah.
between affordability, opportunity, and your personal preferences.
Yeah. You got it.
Mm.
It's about weighing those priorities and figuring out what matters most to you.
Okay. Speaking of priorities, the ATTOM report also goes into some detail on those counties that have the lowest vulnerability scores. So let's talk about those bright spots for a second. What are we looking at there?
Yes. Let's talk about the good news.
The good news.
So Tennessee actually takes the lead here. They have 8 counties that are boasting this really low vulnerability.
Oh, wow.
And we're talking about places like Rutherford and Williamson counties. Those are near Nashville. Blount's and Knox counties, those are around Knoxville. Hamilton County, that's where Chattanooga is. And then a few others.
Okay, so Tennessee is looking pretty good for those seeking a stable market. What about Wisconsin? They had some low-risk areas too, right?
Yeah, Wisconsin is another winner. They have 7 counties making the low-risk list.
Yeah.
We're looking at Brown County, and that includes Green Bay, along with nearby Outagamie County. Dane County, where Madison is, also looks really good, as does Rock County, which is right outside of Madison.
Okay, so we got Tennessee, we got Wisconsin. They're leading the pack in terms of low-risk housing markets.
Mm-hmm.
What sets these areas apart from the higher-risk ones we talked about earlier? What's their, secret sauce?
So the report highlights a few key differences.
Okay.
First and foremost, homeownership costs in these low-risk areas are much more aligned with local wages.
Right, so affordability is less of a concern.
Exactly. That's huge.
Yeah.
Because it means that people are less likely to be stretched thin when it comes to those mortgage payments.
Yeah.
It creates a much more sustainable situation.
Right.
And then, of course, lower unemployment rates.
Yeah.
That also contributes to the stability of these markets.
Yeah.
When people have jobs, they can keep up with their mortgages.
Right.
Fewer foreclosures.
Yep.
Healthier housing market overall.
Yeah, so it all goes back to those 4 core factors.
Right. It all connects.
That ATTOM identified.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, though, is there anything else that the report revealed that we haven't really touched on yet? Any surprises or additional insights?
Yes. There's one more point that I think is really important. The report emphasizes that this analysis is not about predicting which markets are going to crash or which markets are going to, be completely immune to any problems.
Right.
It's not a crystal ball.
So it's more like a compass.
Exactly.
Just to get your bearings.
Yeah, it helps you understand the relative risks.
Right.
It's about recognizing which areas might be more sensitive to shifts in the economy or changes in the housing market.
Okay.
Every market's going to have its own nuances.
Sure.
But some are definitely better equipped to handle those ups and downs
Right.
than others.
Makes sense. So even in those low-risk areas, it's still important for people to do their homework.
Absolutely.
Look at their own personal financial situation
Right.
and make informed decisions. This report just gives us a good framework to, start those conversations.
I completely agree. It's all about informed decision making. The report gives us the data, but it's up to each of us to apply it to our own circumstances and make choices that align with our goals
Right.
and our risk tolerance.
Knowledge is power,
It is,
especially when you're navigating something as complex as the housing market.
for sure.
But I wonder, are there other factors beyond those highlighted in this report that could influence housing market vulnerability?
That's an excellent question. And, sometimes those more obvious factors aren't the only ones that are at play. For instance, you have things like local zoning regulations.
Okay.
Those can have a huge impact on housing supply and affordability.
Right.
Restrictive zoning, that limits construction, that can actually drive up prices
Oh, interesting.
and make it much harder for people to enter that market.
So it's not just about the economy. We're also talking about local policies
Exactly.
and how they shape the housing market.
And then you also have environmental risks to consider.
Oh,
Areas that are prone to natural disasters like floods, wildfires, those might see decreased demand or higher insurance costs,
right.
which can affect property values and that market stability overall.
So natural disasters can definitely have a ripple effect
They can.
on the housing market.
Okay.
And then even demographic shifts can play a role.
Okay.
As populations age, or younger generations delay home ownership,
Yeah.
that demand for certain types of housing can change.
Yeah.
And that's going to impact those market dynamics.
It is a very complex web of factors.
It is.
We've definitely uncovered a lot just by looking at this one report.
We have.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, as they say.
Yeah.
Revealing all these intricate connections
So many connections.
between housing, the economy, and even our personal choices.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I think it really highlights how important it is to think critically about these issues and not just rely on sort of surface level information.
Yeah,
Because there's always more to the story.
always.
It's fascinating how much we've uncovered just by looking at this one report.
It really is.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, as they say, revealing all these intricate connections between housing, the economy, and even our personal choices.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I think it really highlights how important it is to think critically about these issues and not just rely on sort of surface level information.
Yeah, because there's always more to the story. And this deep dive has given us plenty to mull over. We've learned about the factors that contribute to housing market vulnerability. And we've seen how these vulnerabilities play out in different parts of the country. It's empowering to have this knowledge because it allows us to make more informed decisions about our own financial well-being and maybe even contribute to broader conversations about housing affordability and economic stability.
I couldn't agree more. This knowledge empowers us to ask the right questions, challenge assumptions, and advocate for policies that promote sustainable and equitable housing markets.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate for sponsoring today's deep dive. If you're in Northern Nevada and thinking about buying a home, give Skip a call. He can help you navigate these complex waters and find the right property for your needs.
It's always wise to seek expert guidance, especially in a market as dynamic as real estate.
Couldn't agree more. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into housing market vulnerability. We hope you found this exploration insightful and thought-provoking. Remember, the housing market is constantly evolving, so stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking questions. Until next time, keep diving deeper. This deep dive has given us a lot to consider. It's clear that understanding housing market vulnerability goes beyond just looking at numbers on a page. We need to think about the economy, social factors, and even environmental factors to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, it really is all interconnected. And while the ATTOM report provides, a really valuable foundation, it is important to stay informed about those local trends and conditions to make, the best decisions.
Right. Decisions for your own, personal situation.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your insights.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It's always great to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. So for our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about housing market trends, you can definitely check out that ATTOM report. We'll be sure to include a link in our show notes. And as always, we encourage you to do your own research and consult with, trusted financial advisors to make the best decisions for your individual circumstances.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power.
Well, on that note, I want to thank Skip Fenton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate for sponsoring today's deep dive. If you're in Northern Nevada and thinking about buying a home, Skip's the guy to call. He can really help you navigate the market and find the right place for you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into housing market vulnerability. We hope you found this exploration, insightful and something to think about. Remember, the housing market is always changing, so stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, keep diving deeper.